Before we begin, we publish new content every day. So be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The champagne glasses were too fancy for a Sunday dinner, and my sister Chloe was wearing a dress that belonged at a wedding, not at my kitchen table. I should have known right then that something was coming for me. Something that would try to swallow me whole. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent most of my life learning to read the weather in people's faces. 37 years as a head nurse teaches you to spot trouble before it announces itself. But family blindness is different from professional clarity. When it's your own blood sitting across from you, wearing that particular smile that never quite reaches the eyes. You want to believe in the illusion of love instead of trusting your instincts. That Sunday evening in my brownstone in Park Slope, I watched my parents, Richard and Helen, fussing with the silverware they'd brought from Long Island. Real silver. The kind that requires polishing and comes out only for occasions that matter. My mother kept smoothing the tablecloth with nervous fingers, and my father couldn't stop checking his watch. They were 78 and 76 respectively. Still healthy enough to drive into the city. Still sharp enough to orchestrate whatever was about to unfold. Chloe, 52, and perpetually in some kind of crisis, had been unusually quiet during dinner. She'd complimented my roast beef 3 times, asked about my garden twice, and hadn't mentioned money once. In 30 years of Sunday dinners, this had never happened. My sister lived her life like a series of emergency room visits, always bleeding from some self-inflicted wound, always requiring immediate attention and financial transfusions. The house around us held 30 years of my life. Every room bearing the marks of my careful attention and considerable investment. When my husband Michael died 8 years ago, I'd thrown myself into preserving what we'd built together. New roof. Updated plumbing. Restored original hardwood floors. A kitchen renovation that took 6 months and cost more than most people's cars. This wasn't just property. It was proof that I could take care of something. That I could honor what we'd created together. But sitting there that evening, watching my family perform this elaborate dinner theater, I felt the familiar weight of expectation settling on my shoulders. For decades, I'd been the reliable one. The one who showed up when called. Who opened her checkbook when asked. Who swallowed her own needs to keep the family machinery running smoothly. When Chloe needed the down payment for her first apartment, I'd provided it. When she'd defaulted on her car loan, I'd covered it. When her various business ventures collapsed under the weight of poor planning and worse execution, I'd been there with a safety net that somehow never caught her long enough for her to stand on her own. My parents had raised us with clear expectations. Chloe was the baby. The one who needed protection and guidance and endless second chances. I was the responsible one. The one who would naturally shoulder the burden of family obligation. They'd never said this explicitly. But they'd never needed to. Every family crisis had played out the same way. With me stepping forward and Chloe stepping back. With my resources filling the gaps her choices had created. The champagne appeared after dessert. And I knew we'd reached the moment they'd all been preparing for. My father cleared his throat in the way that announced formal proceedings. And my mother's nervous energy finally found its target as she gripped her glass with white knuckles. Chloe stood up. And her voice carried that particular combination of sweetness and steel that I'd learned to fear. She announced that she'd be moving in next Saturday. That our parents had explained how selfish it was for me to keep all these empty rooms to myself while she struggled with rent in Queens. The words came out smooth and rehearsed, as if she'd been practicing this speech for weeks. My father's voice joined hers, heavy with the authority he'd wielded throughout our childhood. He spoke about family obligation, about doing what's right, about how I shouldn't make this difficult. My mother nodded along, her face arranged in the expression of gentle disappointment she'd perfected over the decades whenever I showed signs of resistance. For a moment, I felt the old familiar pull toward compliance. This was how our family worked, how it had always worked. I was supposed to absorb the impact, to bend rather than break, to find a way to accommodate everyone's needs except my own. The role fit me like a well-worn coat, comfortable in its familiarity, even as it suffocated me. But something different happened in that moment. Instead of the usual surrender, I felt a strange calm descend over me. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd been carrying for the past week. Placing it gently on the table between the champagne glasses and the silver serving dishes. I told them the house had been listed for sale 7 days ago. The realtor's contract was right there for them to examine. I had 30 days to vacate the premises. And every single thing they were planning had just become impossible. The silence that followed was unlike anything our family had ever shared. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of understanding or the tense pause of negotiation. It was the sound of a world suddenly turned upside down, of assumptions crashing against an unexpected reality. Chloe's face went through a series of transformations, from confusion to disbelief, to a rage so pure it seemed to illuminate her from within. She stood up so fast her chair tipped backward, her finger pointing at me like an accusation made flesh. She wanted to know how I dared to make this decision without consulting anyone. How I could be so selfish, so vindictive, so cruel to my own family. My father's reaction was more measured, but no less intense. His voice carried the weight of 30 years of assumed authority as he told me to cancel the contract immediately. He reminded me that this house represented family legacy, that I had no right to make unilateral decisions about family property. I listened to their outrage with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. When they finally paused for breath, I asked them a simple question. Who had paid the property taxes for the past 30 years? Who had invested $50,000 in the roof repair when they'd left it to deteriorate beyond saving? Who had stayed in this house to care for our mother when she broke her hip? While Chloe was touring Europe with whatever boyfriend was funding her adventures that month, the questions hung in the air like smoke. And for the first time in decades, none of them had ready answers. The house had been my responsibility and my sacrifice for so long that they'd forgotten it was also my choice to make. Chloe's response was immediate and theatrical. She grabbed her champagne glass and hurled it against the kitchen wall, where it exploded in a shower of crystal and wine. Through the chaos of broken glass and raised voices, she made me a promise that sounded more like a threat. I would regret this decision, and she would make sure of it. The week that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced in my 6 decades of life. The assault came from every direction, coordinated and relentless, designed to wear down my resistance through sheer overwhelming force. The phone calls started the next morning and continued throughout each day. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions about my character and my obligations. Aunts and uncles who'd never shown interest in my life were suddenly experts on family loyalty and moral responsibility. Each conversation followed the same script. I was selfish, ungrateful, cold-hearted, a disgrace to the family name. Chloe's social media campaign was more sophisticated than I'd given her credit for. Her Facebook post painted a picture of a grieving widow, forced from her childhood home by a heartless older sister who'd accumulated wealth while family members struggled. The GoFundMe page that accompanied the post was a masterpiece of manipulation, complete with carefully selected photos and a narrative that cast me as a villain of almost cartoonish proportions. The post went viral within our community, shared and commented on by people who knew only Chloe's version of our story. Neighbors who'd watched me pour my hard-earned savings into maintaining the house for 30 years suddenly looked at me with suspicion. The woman at the corner grocery store, who'd always greeted me warmly, now avoided eye contact. The isolation was swift and complete. A social exile that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my place in the world. But the real assault came on Tuesday afternoon when I returned home to find a moving truck parked outside my house and my father attacking my basement window with a crowbar. Chloe stood beside him, directing the operation with the confidence of someone who believed ownership was simply a matter of taking what you wanted. I called 911 from my front steps, my voice shaking, not with fear, but with a rage I didn't know I possessed. When the police sirens became audible in the distance, my father turned that crowbar toward me, his face twisted with an anger that erased any remaining illusion I'd harbored about family love. He shouted at me about calling the police on my own father, about betraying the family, about forgetting where I came from. But standing there on my own front steps, listening to him rage about his right to my property, I realized I'd never forgotten where I came from. I'd simply never been allowed to acknowledge where I was going. The police took statements and photographs, but no arrests were made. Family disputes rarely result in handcuffs, especially when the participants are well-dressed white people in a expensive neighborhood. But the official record was established, and the boundary line was drawn more clearly than it had ever been before. Thursday brought the financial betrayal that cut deepest of all. The joint savings account I'd maintained with my mother for emergencies had been drained almost completely. $23,000 gone in a single withdrawal, transferred directly to Chloe's account. The money I'd set aside for roof repairs, medical emergencies, and the security that comes with knowing you can handle whatever life throws at you had evaporated in service of my sister's latest crisis. The bank statement arrived by mail, as if the universe wanted to ensure I had a physical document to commemorate my mother's betrayal. Looking at those numbers, at the casual way my security had been sacrificed for Chloe's immediate needs, I felt something inside me crack open. Not breaking exactly, but opening like a door I'd kept locked for decades. I called my friend Margaret that evening, and for the first time in our 40-year friendship, I told her everything. Margaret had been trying to get me to see this pattern for years, but I'd always deflected her concerns with excuses about family loyalty and obligation. Now, sitting in my kitchen with that bank statement spread in front of me like evidence at a crime scene, I couldn't pretend anymore. Margaret's response was swift and professional. As a lawyer who'd spent decades defending women's rights, she'd seen this story before. Within 24 hours, she'd prepared a comprehensive cease and desist letter for each member of my family, documenting their harassment, defamation, and intimidation. The legal language was precise and unforgiving, laying out consequences for any continued interference with my life or property. But Margaret's real gift to me wasn't legal protection. It was perspective. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just family dysfunction, but a deliberate campaign to destabilize my sense of reality and my right to make decisions about my own life. The technical term was gaslighting, but the lived experience was simpler and more devastating. They'd convinced me that my needs didn't matter. The breakthrough came through my neighbor Frank, a retired contractor who'd lived on the block for 40 years. He appeared at my door on Friday evening, carrying a cardboard box that looked like it had survived several decades in someone's basement. Inside were photographs and documents related to my house, artifacts from its construction and renovation over the years. But the real treasure was tucked at the bottom of the box, a stack of canceled checks and legal documents from 1987, the year my father had nearly lost the house to a loan shark. The gambling debts had mounted faster than his job at the post office could cover, and the house had been within weeks of foreclosure when my mother had stepped in. She'd worked 3 jobs that year, cleaning offices before dawn, taking in ironing during the day, and working retail in the evenings. Every dollar had gone toward saving the house. And when she'd finally paid off the debt, she'd made me promise to never let it happen again. The house was my inheritance and my responsibility, she'd told me, because I was the only one strong enough to protect it. Frank had kept these documents all these years, he told me, because he'd known that someday the truth would matter. My father had no legal claim to the house, no moral authority over my decisions, and no right to the respect he'd been demanding. He'd forfeited those privileges decades ago when his choices had nearly destroyed everything my mother had built. Armed with this knowledge, I made the call that would change everything. The young couple who'd been interested in the house had offered full asking price, cash, with a 15-day closing. I'd been hesitating because it felt too fast, too final, too much like running away. Now I realized it wasn't running away at all. It was running toward something better. The final confrontation took place in Margaret's law office 3 weeks later. I'd chosen the location deliberately, wanting neutral ground, where the rules were clear and my authority couldn't be questioned. I wore my best suit, the navy blue one I'd bought for court testimony years ago, and I felt every inch of my 63 years of experience and strength. My family arrived expecting negotiation, compromise, some version of the usual family dance where my needs would eventually be sacrificed for the greater good. Instead, they found themselves facing a multimedia presentation of their own behavior, documented and categorized with the precision of a legal brief. Margaret projected their actions onto a large screen, screenshots of Chloe's defamatory social media posts, security camera footage of the attempted break-in, bank records showing the theft from our joint account, and a detailed financial analysis of every dollar I'd invested in the house and the family over the past decade. The numbers were staggering, even to me. $150,000 in house improvements, emergency loans that were never repaid, bail money, car repairs, medical bills, and a dozen other crises that had somehow become my responsibility to solve. I'd been funding their lives for so long that I'd stopped keeping track of the cost to my own future. But the real revelation came when I told them about the heart condition my doctor had diagnosed the month before. The savings account money my mother had given to Chloe was supposed to fund my cardiac treatment. The beginning of what might be a long and expensive journey back to health. The silence in that room was complete and devastating. For the first time in my adult life, I watched my family confront the consequences of their choices without having me there to absorb the impact. They'd been so focused on taking what they wanted that they'd never considered what they might be taking from. Margaret placed 2 sets of documents on the conference table. For Chloe, a legal agreement requiring her to remove all defamatory content, post a public apology, and accept a permanent restraining order. The alternative was a lawsuit for defamation and fraud that would make her financial problems look like a minor inconvenience. For my parents, a repayment plan for the stolen savings, with interest, and a formal acknowledgement that they had no legal claim to my property or my decisions. Margaret had also prepared a detailed accounting of Frank's evidence about my father's gambling debts, making it clear that his moral authority had been forfeit for decades. They signed everything. Not because they'd suddenly developed respect for my rights, but because the alternative was public exposure and legal consequences they couldn't afford. The family harmony they'd been so eager to preserve was revealed as nothing more than my willingness to subsidize their comfort at the expense of my own. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my new penthouse apartment in Manhattan, 30 floors above Central Park, in a space that's entirely my own. The sale of the brownstone had provided enough money not just for my medical treatment, but for a completely new life designed around my own needs and preferences. The cardiac procedure was successful, and my prognosis is excellent. I've joined a painting class and discovered I have a talent for watercolors that had been dormant for 60 years. I volunteer at a clinic that serves elderly patients, using my nursing skills in service of people who actually appreciate my expertise. My new apartment has floor-to-ceiling windows that flood every room with light. And I wake up each morning to a view that reminds me how high I've climbed. The silence here isn't the oppressive quiet of people walking on eggshells around my family's dysfunction. It's the peaceful silence of a life lived on my own terms. I've learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude, between isolation and independence. The family members who've tried to re-establish contact have found my boundaries clearly marked and consistently enforced. I'm not interested in reconciliation that requires me to pretend the past didn't happen, or to resume my role as the family's emotional and financial safety net. Margaret visits often, and we laugh about how long it took me to find my backbone. Frank stops by when he's in the city, and we compare notes about the neighborhood changes and the young families moving into houses like mine. These relationships feed my soul in ways that family obligation never did. Last week, the doorman called to tell me that Chloe was in the lobby, asking to see me. I looked at the security monitor and saw her standing there, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen her. For a moment, I felt the old pull towards sympathy, the ingrained habit of taking responsibility for other people's pain. But then I remembered the heart condition that nearly went untreated because she'd taken my medical money. I remembered the public humiliation, the attempted break-in, the years of entitled demands disguised as family love. I told the doorman I wasn't available, and I meant it in every sense of the word. I've discovered that the strongest foundation isn't built from blood relations or inherited obligations. It's constructed from respect, genuine care, and the kind of love that doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make room for others. Family isn't where you come from. It's where you choose to belong. The view from my windows changes with the seasons and the light. But it's always beautiful, because it's always mine. I earned this perspective through decades of giving my strength away to people who mistook my generosity for weakness. Now I understand the difference between supporting people you love and enabling people who love what you can provide for them. Some evenings, I stand at those windows and think about the young couple who bought my brownstone. They have plans for renovations and dreams for the future, just like Michael and I did 40 years ago. I hope they'll be wiser than I was about protecting what they build together. I hope they'll learn earlier than I did that love doesn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. The foundation I've built now is different from anything I've ever known. It's not constructed from other people's approval or sustained by my willingness to sacrifice my own needs. It's built from the solid ground of self-respect, reinforced by the knowledge that I have the strength to protect what matters most. That foundation is unshakable because it belongs entirely to me. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, drop a like and a comment, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on our new content.